When Aunt Margaret passed away, it felt like a cold shadow had settled over our family. She was the enigmatic recluse, the one who always seemed to know more than she let on, and her sudden death left a void. It wasn't just her absence, though, that unsettled us, it was the inheritance. The day we received the call from her solicitor, my mother, my little sister Emily, and I piled into the car and drove to her sprawling, dilapidated mansion. As we walked through the dimly lit halls, the air thick with dust and history, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. "She left something for you," the solicitor said, leading us to a small, cluttered room at the back of the house. There, amidst a sea of old furniture and forgotten trinkets, sat a porcelain doll, its eyes a piercing blue, almost lifelike. "It's beautiful," Emily whispered, reaching out to touch it. I felt a shiver run down my spine. "It's yours now," the solicitor said, handing the doll to Emily. "Margaret always said it belonged with family." We took the doll home, placing it on a shelf in the living room. For the first few days, everything was normal, or so it seemed. Then the noises began. At first, it was subtle, a faint whispering that you could easily dismiss as the wind or the creaking of old pipes. But soon, it became impossible to ignore. Doors would slam shut on their own, lights would flicker, and we would hear footsteps in the hallways at night. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, I noticed the doll's eyes seemed to follow me. I shook off the unease, telling myself it was just my imagination. But then, I heard a child's laughter, soft and eerie, echoing through the house. I froze, my heart pounding. There was no one else home but me. I walked over to the doll, its expression frozen in a serene smile. I reached out to touch it, and suddenly, its head snapped to the side, eyes locking onto mine. I stumbled back, heart racing, and the laughter grew louder, more menacing. When I told my mother, she brushed it off, attributing it to stress and an overactive imagination. But Emily, she started talking to the doll, having full conversations as if it were alive. One night, I awoke to find Emily standing at the foot of my bed, the doll clutched in her arms. Her eyes were vacant, her voice a whisper. "She wants to play with you, too." I bolted upright, shaking her. "Emily, what are you doing?" She blinked, as if waking from a dream, and looked down at the doll. I don't know," she stammered, her voice trembling. "I was dreaming, I think. But it wasn't a dream." I knew it wasn't. The doll had a presence, a malevolent energy that seemed to grow stronger each day. It was as if it were feeding off our fear, growing more powerful with each passing moment. And then, one night, we found out the truth. It was a stormy evening, the wind howling outside and the rain lashing against the windows. My mother was out, leaving Emily and me alone in the house. The power flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. Emily was in her room, playing with the doll. I could hear her talking, her voice a soft murmur punctuated by the occasional giggle. I decided to check on her, my unease growing with each step. As I approached her room, I heard Emily's voice clearer, but it was what I heard next that made my blood run cold. A second voice, low and whispering, was answering her. I stopped dead in my tracks, listening. It was unmistakable. Someone, or something, was in there with her. I burst into the room, the door slamming against the wall. Emily looked up at me, startled, the doll perched on her lap. "What's wrong?" she asked, her eyes wide. "Who were you talking to?" I demanded, my eyes scanning the room. There was no one else there. "Just her," Emily said, gesturing to the doll. "She tells me stories." "Emily, this isn't funny," I said, my voice shaking. "Put the doll down." "But she doesn't want me to," Emily protested, clutching the doll tighter. "She says she'll be angry." I stepped forward, grabbing the doll from her. As soon as I touched it, a wave of cold washed over me, and I felt a presence, dark and oppressive. I dropped the doll, stumbling back. Emily screamed, rushing to pick it up. "Don't hurt her," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "She just wants to be our friend." "Emily, that thing is not your friend," I said, backing away. "We need to get rid of it." Suddenly, the room grew colder, and the lights flickered before going out completely. We were plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the occasional flash of lightning outside. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the sound of Emily's sobs. Then, the whispering started again, louder this time, echoing through the room. I could feel something moving, something unseen, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. "Emily, come with me," I said, reaching for her. But as I did, the doll's eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and I felt an invisible force push me back. "She's mine now," the whispering voice said, clear and menacing. "You cannot take her from me." Emily's eyes glazed over, and she stood up, the doll cradled in her arms. "She says I need to stay with her," she murmured, her voice distant. "Forever." I knew then that we were dealing with something far beyond our understanding, something ancient and evil. And I knew I had to find a way to save my sister, no matter what it took. The next day, I skipped school and headed to the local library. I needed answers. The librarian, Mrs. Thompson, a kind elderly woman with a knack for finding obscure information, saw the desperation in my eyes and agreed to help. "Do you have any books on haunted dolls or paranormal activities?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mrs. Thompson raised an eyebrow but nodded. "We do. Follow me." She led me to a dusty section at the back of the library, filled with old, leather-bound books. I spent hours poring over them, reading about cursed objects, possession, and malevolent spirits. One book, in particular, caught my eye, The Malevolent Spirits, A Guide to Recognizing and Banishment. As I flipped through its pages, a passage stood out. Some spirits attach themselves to objects, seeking a host to possess. They feed off fear and negative energy, growing stronger as their influence spreads. These spirits are often bound to objects by dark rituals and can only be banished by breaking the connection. A chill ran down my spine. This sounded exactly like what we were dealing with. But how could I break the connection? The book mentioned rituals and protective symbols, but I needed more specific instructions. I continued reading, finding a section on banishment rituals. It described a process involving salt, candles, and a protective circle, along with a chant to expel the spirit. It seemed daunting, but it was my only hope. Armed with this newfound knowledge, I rushed home. I gathered the necessary items, salt, candles, and a piece of chalk to draw the protective circle. Emily was in the living room, playing with the doll, her eyes vacant. "Emily, come here," I called, trying to keep my voice calm. "I need to show you something." She looked up at me, her expression blank. "What is it?" "Just come with me," I said, reaching for her hand. She followed me reluctantly to the kitchen, where I had set up everything for the ritual. "Sit here," I instructed, guiding her to a chair inside the protective circle I had drawn on the floor. I sprinkled salt around the circle, then placed candles at each point. "What are you doing?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "I'm going to help you," I said, lighting the candles. "We need to get rid of the spirit in the doll." As I began the chant from the book, the air grew colder, and the room seemed to darken. The doll's eyes glowed, and I could feel the malevolent presence intensifying. Suddenly, the candles flickered, and a gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing them. The doll's head turned to face me, its eyes burning with anger. "You cannot banish me," the whispering voice hissed. "She is mine." I felt a force pushing against me, trying to break the circle. Desperate, I continued the chant, louder and more determined. Emily began to scream, clutching the doll tightly. "Let her go," I shouted, pouring every ounce of my will into the words. There was a blinding flash of light, and the room filled with an ear-splitting shriek. The force pushing against me vanished, and the doll fell from Emily's hands, lifeless and cold. Emily slumped in the chair, her eyes slowly focusing. "What happened?" she asked, her voice weak. "We did it," I said, tears streaming down my face. "We got rid of it." But as I looked at the doll, now just a simple, lifeless toy, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. There was something we were missing, something important. And I knew the answers lay with Aunt Margaret. Determined to uncover the full truth, I convinced my mother that we needed to return to Aunt Margaret's mansion. She was reluctant, but the desperation in my voice must have swayed her. Emily seemed distant, but she agreed to come along, her attachment to the doll seemingly broken. We arrived at the mansion just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward us, welcoming us back to the place where it all began. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and mustiness, and the sense of being watched was stronger than ever. "Where do we start?" my mother asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Aunt Margaret's study," I replied. She was always secretive about what she kept in there. We made our way to the study, the floorboards creaking ominously beneath our feet. The room was cluttered with papers, books, and various trinkets. I began to sift through the papers on the desk, while my mother searched the shelves. "Look at this," she said, pulling out an old, leather-bound journal. It was Aunt Margaret's handwriting, the pages filled with detailed notes and sketches. As we read through the journal, a chilling story began to unfold. Aunt Margaret had been deeply involved in the occult, her curiosity leading her to collect various cursed objects, including the doll. She had performed rituals, trying to control the spirits bound to these objects, but something had gone horribly wrong. She summoned something, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Something she couldn't control. The journal described a ritual that Aunt Margaret had attempted, one that was meant to bind a spirit to a host. But the ritual had backfired, trapping the spirit in the doll and making it more powerful. There were pages and pages of frantic notes, describing how the spirit grew stronger, feeding off fear and negative energy. She was trying to find a way to banish it, my mother said, her voice shaking. But she couldn't. There was a final entry, written in a hurried, desperate scrawl. The spirit seeks a host. It must be stopped. The key lies in the attic. Burn the doll. We exchanged a glance, a mixture of fear and determination. The attic. It was the one place we hadn't searched. We made our way up the narrow, creaky stairs, the air growing colder with each step. The attic was dark and cluttered, filled with old furniture and forgotten relics. We searched through the boxes and trunks, looking for anything that could help us. Here! Emily exclaimed, pulling out an old wooden chest. Inside, we found more notes and a strange, ornate dagger. It's a sacrificial knife, my mother said, her voice filled with dread. Aunt Margaret must have planned to use it in the ritual. We also found a small box of matches and a vial of some kind of oil. The instructions were clear, the doll had to be burned, the spirit's connection to our world severed by fire. With the items in hand, we made our way back to the kitchen, where the doll still lay, lifeless. We placed it in the center of a circle of salt, doused it with the oil, and lit the matches. As the flames began to lick at the porcelain, a high-pitched scream filled the room. The doll's eyes glowed one last time, and then it shattered, the pieces crumbling to ash. The air grew warmer, the oppressive feeling lifting. It was over. Or so we thought. We stood there in stunned silence, watching the last of the flames flicker out. Emily seemed relieved, her eyes no longer haunted by the vacant stare that had terrified us for weeks. My mother and I exchanged a glance of wary optimism. Maybe, just maybe, we had done it. Days passed, and things seemed to return to normal. The house was peaceful, the oppressive atmosphere gone. Emily went back to playing with her other toys, her laughter filling the house once more. But there was a lingering unease that I couldn't shake. Something felt unfinished. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a soft rustling sound. At first, I dismissed it as the wind, but it grew louder, more insistent. I sat up, listening intently. The noise was coming from the attic. Grabbing a flashlight, I quietly made my way up the stairs, careful not to wake anyone. The door to the attic creaked open, revealing the dark, cluttered space. The sound was louder now, a persistent scratching, like something trying to claw its way out. I shone the flashlight around, the beam cutting through the darkness. My heart pounded as I followed the noise to a corner of the attic, where an old chest sat. The same chest we had found the dagger in. Taking a deep breath, I opened the chest. Inside, there was nothing but old, tattered cloth. I dug through it, feeling a hard object beneath the layers. I pulled it out, my blood running cold. It was another doll, identical to the one we had burned. A wave of dread washed over me as I realized the truth. We had destroyed the doll, but the spirit had found a new vessel. I stumbled back, the flashlight slipping from my grasp and clattering to the floor. The scratching sound stopped abruptly, replaced by a chilling silence. I heard a whisper, low and menacing. "You thought you could be rid of me so easily?" The doll's eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I turned, and there stood Emily, her eyes vacant once more, the same eerie smile on her face. "She found a new home," Emily said, her voice a monotone echo of the doll's whisper. I backed away, my mind racing. We needed to end this, once and for all. But how? The ritual had failed, and the spirit was stronger than ever. "Emily, please," I begged, reaching out to her. "Fight it. Come back to us." But Emily just laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the attic. "She is mine. Forever." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The spirit wasn't just possessing the doll, it was using Emily as a conduit, growing stronger with each passing day. We had to find another way to break the connection, to save Emily before it was too late. In a desperate bid to find a solution, I returned to Aunt Margaret's journal. There had to be something we missed, some clue that could help us. Flipping through the pages, I found a final note, almost hidden between the last few entries. The spirit can be bound to its original vessel, but the host must willingly relinquish control. This was it. The spirit had to be drawn back into the doll, but Emily had to let go. It was a terrifying thought, but it was our only hope. "Mom," I called, my voice trembling. "We need to perform one last ritual." My mother, pale and exhausted, nodded. Together, we prepared the attic, drawing the protective circle once more and lighting the candles. The new doll lay at the center, its eyes glinting with malice. "Emily," I said softly, reaching out to her. "We need you to come back to us. You have to fight it." Emily stood at the edge of the circle, the spirit's influence clear in her vacant eyes. "She won't let me go," she whispered. "You have to be strong," I urged, tears streaming down my face. "We can help you, but you have to want it. Please, Emily, come back." My mother joined in, her voice breaking. "Emily, we love you. We need you. Let her go." For a moment, it seemed hopeless. Then, something flickered in Emily's eyes, a spark of recognition. I don't want to stay with her," she said, her voice trembling. "That's it," I said, hope surging. "Fight her, Emily. Push her out." Emily stepped into the circle, and we began the chant, our voices strong and determined. The air grew colder, the candles flickering wildly. The doll's eyes glowed brighter, and a high-pitched scream filled the room. Emily collapsed to her knees, her body racked with tremors. "She won't let go," she cried. "It hurts. Stay with us, Emily," my mother pleaded. "You're stronger than she is. You can do this." With a final, desperate effort, Emily screamed, a sound of pure agony. The doll's eyes blazed with light, and then, with a deafening crack, it shattered into 1,000 pieces. Emily slumped to the floor, her breathing shallow but steady. We rushed to her side, holding her close. "It's over," I whispered, relief flooding through me. "It's finally over." But as we comforted Emily, I noticed something in the corner of the attic. The chest we had found the dolls in was gone, replaced by an empty void. A cold realization settled over me. The spirit was gone, but so was its vessel. It hadn't been destroyed, it had been released. We had won the battle, but the war was far from over. And somewhere out there, the spirit was waiting, biding its time, seeking its next victim. The end.